The morning sun glinted off the glass towers of Manhattan. But inside the penthouse apartment, Jasmine Hart's world felt dim. Her body still carried the weight of her newborn son, Noah, and the sleepless nights had left shadows under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Yet, she had expected her husband, Alexander Hart, to be gentle, even tender. Instead, his words were sharp, big. Alexander said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "I barely recognize you." The words lodged themselves in Jasmine's chest, heavy and suffocating. Only months ago, she had trusted this man with her life, given him her love, her body, her dreams. And now, he was looking at her like she was a stranger, someone inferior. She forced a smile, hiding the storm that roared inside her. "I just had our baby," she said softly, trying to remind him of the miracle they had created. Alexander shrugged. "Still, you've got to get back in shape. People notice." Jasmine's heart cracked. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual cruelty, the complete disregard for the emotional toll of childbirth. She walked out onto the balcony, the city stretching endlessly below her, glittering like a reminder of everything she thought she had. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the invisible, grinding loneliness of a woman who had expected her marriage to be a sanctuary. Alexander, meanwhile, retreated into his office, leaving Jasmine with the shadows and the baby's cries. Then came the breaking point. Alexander's company, Hart Global, a financial empire built over decades, began to crumble under poor investments and overconfidence. Jasmine, once drowning in despair over his words, noticed a spark inside herself. She would not be diminished, not by him, not by anyone. It started with a magazine cover. An old friend, Marissa Cole, now a talent scout for one of the world's leading modeling agencies, reached out after seeing Jasmine's quiet but striking photos online. "Jasmine, you have presence. You're magnetic. Let's talk." Jasmine laughed, almost nervously. "Me, a model." Marissa's voice was firm. "You don't know your own power." "I do." At night, Alexander came home to a small dinner Jasmine had prepared, simple, comforting. He noticed nothing of her transformation, her resolve. But Jasmine knew something was shifting. She smiled politely as he spoke of quarterly losses, missed deals, and boardroom crises. "I don't know how we'll recover from this," Alexander muttered, unaware that Jasmine's mind was racing ahead, calculating a different kind of success. By the time the first meeting with Marissa happened, Jasmine's confidence had started to bloom. She walked into the studio, baby Noah strapped safely to her chest, and felt eyes turn. Photographers, stylists, directors, they all paused, struck by her aura, her unpolished yet undeniable beauty. It wasn't just her body, it was her presence, her authenticity, her story. Jasmine Hart was no longer just Alexander's wife. She was a woman with ambition, vision, and strength. By the end of that week, she had signed her first multi-billion-dollar contract with a luxury fashion brand. When Alexander found out, he was stunned. "How? How did this happen?" he whispered, his voice a mixture of disbelief and panic. His empire was crumbling. Yet Jasmine, his supposed big and weak wife, was ascending into a world he could no longer touch. Jasmine looked at him, calm, unshaken. "I told you," she said softly. "You never saw me for who I really am." For the first time, she realized that her life was no longer about Alexander Hart. It was about Jasmine Hart, the mother, the woman, the rising star. The city, once cold and indifferent, seemed to welcome her with open arms. The first time Jasmine walked onto the runway, she felt both terrified and alive. The bright lights, the murmur of cameras, the smell of perfume and fabricate was intoxicating. But more than anything, she felt power. Every step she took was a declaration. She was no longer invisible, no longer defined by someone else's words. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from her agency, international photographers and brand executives. Offers poured in. A cover for Vogue, an exclusive collaboration with a high-end designer, invitations to luxury events. In the space of weeks, Jasmine went from being the new mother, struggling with confidence, to the hottest new face in fashion. Meanwhile, Alexander's empire was crumbling at an alarming rate. Hart Global had made a series of bad investments that left the company on the brink of bankruptcy. Board members whispered, lawyers circled like vultures, and investors began pulling out. Alexander, once arrogant and untouchable, began to experience the panic and humiliation he had dismissed in others. At first, he tried to keep up appearances. He would call Jasmine during meetings, his voice polite, but tinged with tension. "Are you sure this is the right move?" Modeling. "It's fleeting." Jasmine, seated in a minimalist New York studio filled with sunlight, looked at him through the glass screen, her expression serene but resolute. "I'm sure this is just the beginning. Alexander, my life isn't yours to control." For the first time, she realized that his arrogance, his constant need to belittle her, had been a weakness she could exploit, not in a malicious way, but in the sense that she no longer let it define her. Every contract she signed, every appearance she made, was a quiet rebuttal to the years of scorn. By the time spring arrived, Jasmine Hart was no longer just a rising model. She was a phenomenon. Covers of international magazines, exclusive campaigns with luxury brands, and invitations to events in Paris, Milan, and Tokyo cemented her as a global icon. Her story of resilience and transformation inspired countless women, and her social media following exploded into the millions. She balanced it all with grace. Despite the whirlwind of travel, photo shoots, and public appearances, she remained devoted to Noah. Each morning, she prepared his breakfast, read him stories, and tucked him into bed with the same gentle care that had first defined her as a mother. But now, she was not only nurturing her son, she was nurturing her independence, her confidence, and her destiny. Meanwhile, Alexander's life was unraveling at a terrifying speed. Hart Global teetered on bankruptcy. Investors had lost confidence. Board members were rebelling, and lawsuits loomed on the horizon. The man who had once commanded rooms with his presence now scrambled to keep the remnants of his empire afloat. He tried to call Jasmine, masking desperation with pride. "We need to talk," he said during one of her shoots in Manhattan. Jasmine, sitting in a minimalist studio filled with natural light, calmly set her phone aside. Her assistant whispered, "It's him again." Jasmine's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. "Let him wait." Alexander's frustration grew with each ignored call. He began to understand, in the most humiliating way, that Jasmine's rise was not about him. Never had been. She was building her own empire, and she was thriving while he floundered. The confrontation came during the Met Gala, an event that had become the apex of Jasmine's social calendar. She arrived in a gown that seemed to flow like liquid gold, turning every head in the room. Alexander, hoping to make an impression, attempted to approach her. "Jasmine, please listen to me," he said, voice urgent, slightly trembling. She looked at him with eyes that were calm, unyielding, and full of the quiet power of someone who had endured betrayal and emerged stronger. "Alexander," she said softly, "I hear you, but I don't need you anymore." He reached out, as if trying to touch her, but she stepped back, gently, decisively. "I'm not the woman you insulted," she continued. "I'm not the woman you tried to diminish. I am Jasmine Hart, and I am building a life you cannot take from me." Around them, cameras clicked. Flashes lit the room. But all Alexander could see was the woman he had once overlooked, someone he had called big, in a cruel moment that now seemed prophetic of his own failure. Jasmine turned gracefully, her attention shifting to her companions, her work, and her son, leaving Alexander standing there in stunned silence. For the first time, he felt powerless, not as a businessman, not as a husband, but as a man who had failed to recognize true strength when it was standing right in front of him. In the weeks that followed, Alexander's world crumbled further. Hart Global declared bankruptcy, and he was forced to sell his assets. Meanwhile, Jasmine expanded her empire, launching her own luxury fashion line, partnering with philanthropic initiatives, and becoming the face of empowerment campaigns that reached millions. Every public appearance, every magazine feature, every contract signed was a reminder that she had risen, not in spite of her challenges, but because of them. Her life was now entirely her own, and Alexander's presence, once so dominating, had become irrelevant. Jasmine had fully embraced her identity, a powerful woman, a devoted mother, and an unstoppable force in the global spotlight. Alexander's attempts to re-enter her life were futile, serving only to highlight the chasm between the woman he had underestimated and the man he had lost. Jasmine walked through the city streets one evening, Noah in his stroller, the skyline glowing behind her. She breathed in the night air, feeling a sense of triumph that was untainted by bitterness. This was her victory, not just over Alexander, but over doubt, fear, and the limitations imposed by others. She had won, and in doing so, she had discovered the true measure of her own power. By summer, Jasmine Hart had become a name that resonated across continents. Luxury brands vied for her signature. Fashion weeks in Paris and Milan featured her as the centerpiece of their shows, and magazine covers adorned every newsstand. She had transitioned from a model to a brand, a symbol of resilience, beauty, and ambition. Yet, with her rise came new pressures. She was constantly traveling, meeting with executives, attending exclusive galas, and balancing the delicate demands of being a mother. Noah, her anchor in this whirlwind, was the reminder that every choice she made was not just for her, but for him as well. Jasmine learned to navigate this high-stakes world with grace, knowing her strength lay not only in her beauty, but in her intelligence, composure, and vision. Meanwhile, Alexander had become a shadow of the man he once was. His financial empire had collapsed entirely, leaving him vulnerable and desperate. He tried to reach Jasmine repeatedly, sending messages and emails, each one more pleading than the last. "I need you," he wrote. "We can fix this." But Jasmine had learned the hard truth. Some people, even those closest to you, could not be trusted to value your worth. She had built a life on her own terms, and she refused to let nostalgia or regret pull her back into the past. Her international tours were exhilarating. In Milan, she walked through the cobblestone streets in bespoke gowns, attended private dinners with top designers, and gave interviews to audiences who hung on her every word. The press hailed her as a mother-turned-mogul, a woman who had transcended societal expectations and reshaped the narrative of female empowerment. At one event, a major luxury conglomerate approached her with a proposal, a multi-billion-dollar collaboration that would cement her status as a global business icon. Jasmine considered the offer carefully, weighing the potential impact on her family and her brand. With Noah at her side, she agreed, signing the deal that would secure her influence, wealth, and legacy. Back in New York, Alexander's attempts to reconcile became more erratic. He showed up at venues where she was scheduled to appear, hoping for a moment of attention, a chance to speak. Each encounter left him more humiliated, while Jasmine remained composed, polite, yet entirely untouchable. One evening, after a long day of meetings in London, Jasmine returned to her penthouse overlooking the Thames. She reflected on how far she had come, from the nights of self-doubt to the spotlight of global fame, from Alexander's cruel words to the admiration of millions. She had transformed her pain into power, her rejection into opportunity, and yet she remained grounded. Fame and success had not changed her core values. She used her platform to champion women's empowerment, maternal health, and charitable causes, creating a balance between ambition and compassion. Her life was not defined by revenge, but by her ability to rise above betrayal and redefine success on her own terms. Alexander, watching from afar as Jasmine's empire grew, realized the extent of his loss. The man who once mocked her, who had dismissed her value, now had no influence over the woman who had become a force of nature. He had nothing left to offer her, except regret. Jasmine stood at the pinnacle of her personal and professional journey. She was admired, respected, and unstoppable. Alexander's presence in her life was no longer a threat, but a reminder of a chapter she had outgrown. She had transformed her pain into a platform, her suffering into strength, and her past into a foundation for the extraordinary life she now commanded. She gazed out over the city skyline, Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms. Jasmine felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The world had tried to define her, to diminish her, to silence her voice, but she had triumphed. Not through bitterness, but through courage, resilience, and unshakable self-belief. Jasmine Hart was no longer a wife defined by her husband's judgment. She was a mother, a mogul, a symbol, and most importantly, herself. The winter air in New York carried a crisp chill, but inside the penthouse, Jasmine Hart radiated warmth and confidence. Her life had transformed in ways Alexander could never have imagined. She had gone from the woman he once mocked to a global icon, an unstoppable force of business, beauty, and compassion. By now, Jasmine had expanded her empire beyond modeling. Her luxury fashion line was internationally acclaimed. Her philanthropic initiatives were reshaping maternal healthcare programs, and her influence extended to television and digital media. Every decision she made was calculated, intentional, and reflective of the woman she had become: bold, intelligent, and unshakable. Alexander, on the other hand, had reached a point of undeniable defeat. Hart Global was liquidated, his finances in shambles, and his personal reputation tarnished. He had attempted, one final time, to meet Jasmine, hoping perhaps for reconciliation or forgiveness. But when he arrived at her penthouse, he found the door closed, not just physically, but symbolically. A note lay on the marble countertop, elegant and firm. "Alexander, I have no need for what you once were. My life is full, my heart is complete, and my purpose is greater than your regret. You were never my measure. I am mine." Jasmine. Alexander read the note over and over, each word a dagger of realization. He had underestimated her, mocked her, and abandoned the person who would one day surpass him in every conceivable way. The truth settled heavily. He could never reclaim the power or presence he had lost. Meanwhile, Jasmine's world continued to flourish. At a charity gala in Los Angeles, she accepted an award for her humanitarian efforts, dedicating it to mothers around the world. Cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, and millions followed her story online. Yet, for all the fame and accolades, Jasmine's greatest pride remained her son Noah, who represented the purest manifestation of her love, resilience, and determination. In a quiet moment later that evening, Jasmine reflected on her journey. The hurt, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, they had all forged her into the woman she was today. She understood now that true empowerment was not revenge. It was rising above the attempts of others to diminish her. Across the country, Alexander watched coverage of Jasmine's gala. Her words, her grace, and her success. He felt the full weight of his failure, not just financially, but personally. He had tried to break her spirit, yet she had built an empire. He realized that Jasmine Hart had always been unstoppable. He had merely delayed the world from seeing it. Jasmine, however, did not dwell on the past. She had no desire to gloat or to revisit the pain Alexander had caused. Her focus was on creation, inspiration, and the future. She signed contracts late into the night, strategized new philanthropic initiatives, and whispered bedtime stories to Noah, teaching him strength, compassion, and resilience. By the final scene, Jasmine stood on the balcony of her penthouse, overlooking a skyline that mirrored her own ascent. The city lights shimmered like stars, reflecting a life forged from courage and determination. Noah slept peacefully in her arms, the embodiment of her love and legacy. She breathed in deeply, feeling the profound truth of her journey. She had been underestimated, mocked, and challenged, but none of it had stopped her. Her husband's empire had fallen. Her own had risen, and she had done it all on her terms. Jasmine Hart was no longer defined by anyone's perception of her. She was a mother, a mogul, and an icon of resilience. And in that quiet, radiant moment, she smiled. She had won not through spite, but through unwavering self-belief. She had transformed her life into a story of triumph, one that would inspire countless others to rise above their own challenges and to find success on their own terms. Jasmine Hart had finally found the ultimate victory herself. Thank you for watching. Please tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more amazing stories.